you could just tell us a bit about like who you are.
Yeah, for sure. So like Andres said, guys, I'm Clint Brayfield. You can call me doctor, whatever. It doesn't really matter to me. But I'm a current first year family medicine resident here at the University of New Mexico. I matched here last year. And yeah, so I'm here doing my first year here. Typically they call it your PGY1 or intern year. And family medicine residency is typically 3 years. So I got, quite a bit of ways to go. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, so just introducing myself a little bit more. I'm Navajo. Like Andres said, I is from Las Vegas, but I did grow up a little bit on the reservation before moving to Las Vegas in like middle school. And so that's kind of where I'm from. Typically, whenever I introduce myself, I like to kind of give the background of what brought me into medicine. A lot of that has to do with my family. My dad has a bipolar mental disorder, which affected my life growing up pretty significantly, I would say, starting at like 12 years old. And so that's what got me interested in medicine, as well as coming across the UNM's combined BMD program that Andres is also a part of. Let's see, so I got into that program, and that's kind of just where I've started and how I've gotten to where I am, and I'm sure we'll go into more detail with more questions that you have for me.
Most definitely. So if you could kind of tell us a bit about, because you just finished up med school recently, right?
Right.
And so if you could kind of like go into what you found the differences between residency and med school are, and how you adjusted to those differences.
Yeah, it's tough. I'm still adjusting, still trying to figure things out. So in medical school, the thing about it is that it's very structured. Mm-hmm. You know what you need to do, where you need to go, what you need to do to, the next 4 years of your life. It's kind of planned out. Your first 2 years are your clinical years. You learn all the sciences during those 2 years. After that, you take the step 1 exam, which is a really hard board exam, just like your typical standardized test, but this one is really long. It's about 8 hours long, and it's super intense. A lot of programs, they've changed it recently, but a lot of programs used to use it to kind of filter out med students when they're applying to residencies, their applications, but now it's moving to pass-fail, which is, I think, a good thing. But yeah, so that's a really hard test. And then your third year is all your clinicals, where you go through all the different specialties, not every single one, but all the core ones that you need to know. Then you take another board exam called step 2 right after that, which is, in my opinion, was a little bit easier, just because it's more applicable, clinical stuff, easier to remember. And then fourth year is kind of like you just do a bunch of electives, try to figure out what you want to do, and apply to residency. So I think the big differences between medical school and residency is the amount of responsibility that you have. I think as a student, everyone sees you as like a learner, and you make mistakes, and they're very forgiving, and they don't expect a lot from you. And so when you know a lot, it's really easy to like stand out and be like, oh wow, this kid's really impressive. Now in residency, you just have a lot more responsibility. It's also it's a lot. I think not only just mentally, but physically as well. Right. The hours are really demanding. There is a work restriction in terms of hours that you can go up to, set by the ACGME, which heads like the residency, organization and things like that. It's 80 hours a week. A lot of residents will, typically in the surgical specialties, will go over those hours. Right. And that's kind of a violation. But that's just kind of how it goes. But typically we're supposed to work 80 hours a week. I would say I work around like 60 to 80 hours per week, depending on the rotation that I'm on. Yeah. So I think just like time-wise, it's very draining. The cool thing about it is that we don't have as many exams in residency as we did in medical school. I remember my first 2 years of medical school, it's like one quiz every week, big test at the end of like a 4-week or an 8-week block. It's just a lot of testing. So I think in terms of the differences in difficulty, medical school was just trying to learn to be efficient and being able to study and kind of hold a lot of information. Residency is also you trying to be efficient, but also taking on responsibilities and being challenged in how you're going to manage real life people and these illnesses that they come in with, and just I think the biggest thing that sets them apart is just the hours
Right.
that you have to work.
I see. And what are your like thoughts on like doctor burnout? Because I think that seems to be an issue that a lot of doctors face, and even medical school students. You know.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a culture thing. I think a lot of physicians in the past, this is what they experience, and not necessarily that they want us to experience the same thing, but it's kind of this like, oh, it's residency, it is what it is. And so I think that kind of contributes to it in terms of the culture, but I also think that a lot of people that go into medicine are very devoted type people, and they just want the best for their patients.
Right.
And it's really easy to get caught up in that and not know how to turn that switch off.
Right.
And also in residency, you're just in like the hospital all the time, so it kind of becomes like your life in a way. And so that switch is really hard to turn off. And I think, you know, a lot of people are learning that we need to take time for ourselves. But really, I think a lot of the burnout in residency and, you know, physicians, attendings in general, is just the way our medical system is set up. The training, but also after that, all the documentation that you have to do.
Right.
Just all these things on top of trying to use a lot of brain power to take care of really sick people, and just having that pressure on you, on top of like needing to document so that you don't get sued one day, and just all these different things that I think play into it that really burn us out, whether we, you know, see it or not. And there's a lot of research and stuff going into that now. I don't know if you've ever like read the research on like physician suicide. I think they might be the highest or second highest profession in terms of suicide rate. And it's just, I don't know, I think it's just the culture of medicine of where it is now.
Right.
And luckily the program that I am at here at UNM in the family medicine department, I feel like they're super aware of all this stuff, and they really try to support us as much as possible, while also allowing us to get this education that we need in order to take care of patients when we are out of our training.
I see. Yeah, for sure. So, in your opinion, what do you think are the characteristics of an individual who would make like a good doctor?
There's so many. I think the biggest thing for me when I see someone that's like, wow, like I would want them to be my doctor, I think is just compassion. And it's really hard to do. I think we come into medicine bright-eyed, and then we start to see all these things that, you know, just make medicine kind of a thorn in your side, I would say. And that can kind of dissipate that. But I think someone who can have compassion, that's able to not necessarily like try to relate to people, but is a very good listener. I think those are the people that I see, and I'm like, wow, like even though they had 5 minutes to see me, I felt that they listened to me, and I felt like they cared. They generally cared about my well-being. I think a couple of things in terms of just, you know, other characteristics is just someone that is, you know, determined to kind of get through this. Because I think something that I learned early on in medical school and started to see is people dropping off and deciding not to do medicine and things like that, because, you know, they felt that the struggle wasn't worth, you know, what they wanted to do. And I think if you do have passions for something else, that might be something to explore before going into medicine. Just because, you know, medical school is super demanding. It takes up a lot of your time, and if it's not something that you genuinely see yourself doing and like nothing but that for the rest of your life, it would probably be a good idea to kind of go down other routes before you go back to medicine. And medicine's always going to be here. But yeah, just to summarize that question, I really think someone who listens, who's compassionate, and is able to, I'm trying to figure out a word to kind of summarize the last part that I said, but maybe someone who is determined and knows like this is what they want to do for the rest of their life.
Right, for sure. And do you feel like medicine gets less demanding? Because as you mentioned, you said that medical school can be very demanding, and you know, do you feel like it eases up a bit, or do you feel like it intensifies, or what are your thoughts on that?
I would say that in medical school, when I look back, I don't think it was easy, but I don't think it was as intense as residency is. Just from people that I talked to, attendees that I've talked to, like residency is definitely the height at which your stress is the highest because you're trying to learn so much. And you're trying to perform and you're trying to take care of patients and you're learning how to be a doctor.
Right.
You're not, as opposed to in medical school, you're studying, you're learning, you need to pass these tests, which is super important. But, you don't really have or feel that ownership to these patients that you're seeing, especially like in family medicine where I see patients monthly or every 3 months and you kind of get attached and you want to do the best that you can for them. And so making sure you're trying to do the right thing every single time, I think that gets really hard.
Right.
But I have heard that the attending life is a pretty good life to be living after. So I'm looking forward to that. Still have a while, but I would say like definitely residency is probably the peak of where that intensity really kind of comes from.
Right. And so I know a lot of people, like, what stops them from pursuing medicine is just the outrageous cost of med school. Which ways do you feel like people can pay for med school, and which way did you personally pay for med school?
Yeah, so I think trying to find a way to finance medical school is really difficult. A lot of people just straight up do student loans. And I think that's super common route to take. But a couple of ways that I feel like not a lot of people maybe take advantage of, or maybe they do and they're really hard to get, is just looking up scholarships for medical school. There aren't as many as there are for undergrad, but there are out there, and I know at least here at UNM there's scholarships throughout medical school that they advertise and you can apply for and potentially get. The way I financed medical school is that I got some scholarships. The BAMD program used to give out full tuition scholarships for I think 3 individuals, and you had to apply for those. So I was one of those individuals. I was lucky enough to get one. And then I also applied for the Indian Health Services scholarship as well. So those are what covered all of my tuition and living expenses and all of those things through medical school.
Yeah, so right now I'm a pre-med, and so a lot of the classes that I'm taking right now, I personally don't see a connection between like those classes and actual medicine. Like I can see how it relates, of course, but I don't think I'll have to do general chemistry as a doctor as much. What are your thoughts on as far as do you feel like there's many correlations between undergrad and parts of med school that relate to being a doctor?
Yeah, I think when we all get to medical school and in residency, I literally cannot tell you how to do the acid bases. My roommate is currently going through the MCAT process right now and studying for that. He'll ask me questions. I'm like, dude, I literally don't know. I learned those for the test, and that was pretty much it. But I think the relevance of the pre-med courses is just being able to think critically and being able to kind of push yourself, because I think you need to be able to do that in medical school, especially because in medical school they give you a lot more freedom. I feel like in terms of in terms of undergrad, like they definitely don't hold your hand in medical school. If you fail a test, you fail a test. Not that they're not going to help you and try to figure out what's going on, but if you don't initiate trying to figure out what's going on, it's kind of just sink or swim type thing that goes on in medical school. But in terms of like the content, I think the most relevant things for medical school is things like anatomy, cell biology, some physics concepts that come in, like liquid, fluid dynamics, things like that, that I feel like if you can kind of get those down, you'll get a pretty good base of what you need to know in terms of the sciences. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the learning, even what you get in undergrad, is kind of like minuscule in comparison to what you learn in medical school, and a lot of what you will need to learn in medical school it's a lot. They always use the expression like drinking water from a fire hose.
Yeah.
And I always thought going into medical school, that's probably like exaggerated or whatever, but it's really not. Like there's just so much to learn, and not enough time to learn it all.
Right.
But I would say definitely, even though you will take those classes, it helps you become familiar with the terminology and things like that. But yeah, you definitely won't cover all that you need to know in medical school, even in the undergrad courses, like the biology ones.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
So along those lines, obviously medicine's a long journey, 8 years just to even get that certification, and that's, if you're going all the way through.
Yeah.
But are there any events that you found that made you want to quit medicine, or is there anything that you found that you just did not like about medicine?
Yeah. So I don't think there was ever anything that made me want to quit medicine, just because I think in those moments that made it hard, I thought, okay, like, is there something else that I could do? And nothing else really caught my attention like medicine did. And then I also felt this responsibility to finish for my community, specifically like the Native community. I look and see, and less than 1% of physicians are Native American, and it's even smaller for the percent of medical students that are Native. And so I think I felt a sense of responsibility that I need to contribute to that. So I think those two really were helpful in me staying in medicine and to overcome the things that I felt like, this is the sucky part of medicine. And so a couple of things that didn't necessarily make me want to quit medicine, but made me feel like, man, like medicine is messed up, is just the cultural differences of medicine and the lack of representation for people of color in medicine. It's very much a space that was not meant for people, I would say, like me, that come from a low income family, first time doing this, and it's a different culture. I felt like it was hard to see myself as a doctor because there's not really many like Native American physicians that I could look up to be like, oh, look, they made it, so I can make it too. But I think also just the things that are kind of intricate to medicine and maybe just the medical education process was just barriers. I think for a lot of people, I think people whose English is their second language could struggle a lot in medicine. People who didn't have any family members that not only aren't doctors or lawyers, but like aren't anything else in terms of higher education and things like that. I think those provide a lot of barriers that people don't necessarily see, but are things that students that come from disadvantaged backgrounds kind of struggle with. And so that rubbed me the wrong way, the way medicine is, and just kind of seeing, oh wow, like medicine was not made for someone like me.
Right. So given your negative experiences with medicine, what could you say is probably your highlight of medicine thus far?
Yeah, I think the coolest thing about medicine, not only just like learning the knowledge, but just the ability, especially after finishing medical school and becoming a doctor, like that, this is gonna sound weird, but like that power, that kind of status that you get, and how you can use that to affect change in a bunch of different areas, and not just like in a hospital clinical setting, but like out in the world. I think doctors hold a lot of maybe like, I don't know, social capital that at least now is pretty stable. I don't know how it's going to be in the future, but I think like they can influence a lot of things that go on throughout the world, throughout the country. They can impact policy. They can bring up issues that unfortunately others have been voicing for a very long time, but for whatever reason their voices are deafened or ignored. So I think that's kind of been the highlight thing that I kind of hold on to, that I really like about medicine, is that it gives me an opportunity to have a seat at this table that honestly needs me to be there, but more importantly needs the people that I like represent to be there as well, so their voices can be heard and projected, and I can amplify that. So that's been like this is like really cool about medicine. Aside from learning all like the diseases and things like that, I think in medicine you just learn to think differently. You learn to think critically in a way that's just different from, I don't know, maybe other professions are taught to think. So I feel like now, like I have a better reading comprehension. I feel like I just can relate to all these things that are like super complex and figure out a way to like understand them, because you're forced to understand all these crazy diseases and things like that in medicine.
Right, for sure. So given that you were talking about saying that like some of these groups, they're misrepresented or just not represented at all, what relationship do you think is medicine and politics, do they play into one another?
Oh, most definitely. I think especially coming from a family medicine, community medicine like point of view, and as I'm sure you've probably learned through your health medicine, human values classes, like anything that goes on in the world can affect someone's health. And so the way that our country or any country in general kind of goes about trying to help people through policy, and that falls into the realm of politics. And so I think medicine and politics is kind of intertwined in that the things that are passed through a country's like government, whether that's laws and things like that, different policies, it affects people and the way they live. And the way they live affects their health, whether that's adding more stress, taking away stress. I'm sure you've probably learned about like maybe food deserts and things like that. And just a couple of other things that I can see going on as we continue on in this pandemic. The big controversy between the vaccines and how fast they were kind of rolled out, and just all these political minds kind of jumping on that and not knowing like the medicine behind all of that, and how that can get like really messy. You see how that can affect people's health in terms of them being able to get the vaccine or not, or all the different kind of communities that are struggling more with COVID than other communities. Those can be pinpointed back to politics and the policies that were written in and passed down that are affecting all those kind of communities. So they're definitely intertwined, and it's really difficult to feel like, man, like how can I separate the two, because you just can't. There's like no way to separate them. And so I feel like as physicians, it's our responsibility to kind of be going through both realms to figure out, okay, what's the best thing that I can do for the patients that I serve, and the needs that I see that need to be met.
Right, for sure. And I feel like that's especially the case like in our country, where it's healthcare is not necessarily the most cheap thing and essential to everyone. But yeah, so right now we're gonna go over some like quick round questions.
Oh yeah.
And so it'll be a quick question, and like you could give like a 1 to 2 sentence response. But
cool.
Yeah. So what's your music taste?
Oh, my music taste right now, I like a lot of things. I learned to like 80s music, which is like bomb. Love it so much. Thanks to like Hoser and people that back home.
Yeah, for sure.
But my thing right now is like the Latin pop reggaeton stuff. Yeah. Oh, I'm so into that right now. Like Ozuna, Maluma, Bad Bunny. Like sure. I just listen to that in the car, and on nights when I'm kind of just by myself typing my notes, I'll have that playing in the workroom and things like that. So
sure.
That's what I'm about right now.
Yeah, for sure. All right, favorite fast food restaurant?
Favorite fast food restaurant? That one's really, really hard. Gosh, I don't even know if I can answer that, but I would probably say something like Wingstop. We were talking about it earlier. Ooh. I like wings. Wings are awesome. Yeah. But I also really liked Chick-fil-A and Whataburger. I think those are kind of like my go-tos. Yeah. Back home, I was like a Taco Bell guy through and through, so I'd go and get those, and then Allsup's, of course. So yeah.
MD or DO?
MD or DO, like the medical professions?
Yes.
Man, I don't know.
Or both?
Both. I'm gonna say both. So I applied to some programs that were kind of DO heavy, and they wanted to do like the manipulation stuff in training. And I was like, oh man, I don't know if I can tackle that onto what I'm already trying to do. But I definitely feel like DO and MDs they're both physicians. They learn the same things. They know they have to pass these boards exams, and they're on the same playing field. So I definitely wouldn't choose one over the other. There's just different routes to get to where they are.
For sure. All right. Is there anything, this is the last question, but is there anything that you could tell maybe 10 years younger you, or anyone who's in the audience, pre-med, who's going through something that you've already gone through, and what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I love this question because I feel like if I was sitting where you guys are now, it'd be super helpful to have like kind of learned these things, but then also beneficial to have actually kind of gone through and struggled through to like learn these things. So a couple of things that I like to tell, pre-med students that are kind of dreaming to become a physician and want to do all these things is just to stay grounded. I think number one, you're going to need to be able to reflect on why you wanted to go into medicine in the first place, because it's a really, really hard route. I think the second thing that I always tell pre-meds is to have a really solid support group, whether that's your family, significant other, or friends. Like I think I was so grateful to go through the BME program through undergrad and having, these like 10 plus people that I knew coming into medical school that I already done school with to like help me through that. I think that was super, super helpful. So I think those are the two biggest things. The third one I feel like is really hard for people to understand and grasp until they actually go through it, but like failure. Don't be afraid to fail and really learn from failure. I think it's one of the greatest learning tools that we have. I think I talk to a lot of attendings just because, I'm halfway through intern year. I feel like I should know more than I should. And I feel like I'm making mistakes left and right. Granted, they're minor mistakes, but like it bothers me because I'm like, what if you weren't here, and what if I did this XYZ thing? They're like, that's what you're training for. We're here to help you with that. But they said, like a lot of the learning I did was just like by failing, and try not to make that mistake again because that sticks with you. So I've done a lot of failing, in undergrad and medical school, and I think it was something that I really had to learn to embrace so that I could learn from those and see them as like learning and teaching opportunities rather than opportunities that tell me that like I suck, I can't do this, and you're never gonna make it. So I think those are the three biggest things that I like to tell pre-med students, because honestly, it's not something that you can like measure and like, what's the word I'm looking for, with like numbers and a grade and things like that. They're kind of things that like work on your character and help build you as a person in order for you to get through the pre-med stuff, the medical school stuff, and the residency stuff.
For sure. Yeah, well, thank you so much for being with us today and talking with me. I really do appreciate it, and I'll definitely leave a link to like your Instagram and stuff in the video. And
follow me on Instagram.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it, and we'll have to do another interview sometime soon.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course.